The housekeeper found him in the blue sitting room on a Thursday morning, standing in the centre of it with no particular purpose visible, which was unusual enough that she paused in the doorway to observe it before making herself known. He was not reviewing anything. He was not consulting any document or directing his attention at any identifiable object in the room. He was simply standing in the middle of it, the way a person stands in a space when something about the space has become unfamiliar, and the unfamiliarity has stopped them before they understood it had. She had seen that expression on his face before. Not often. The Duke of Ashverton was not a man given to expressions that admitted uncertainty, but she had seen it twice in the 4 years she had managed his household, and both times it had been in rooms that had recently changed, and both times the change had been her doing. Not Mrs. Holt's doing. His wife's. The blue sitting room had been unremarkable when the Duchess arrived. It had been a room that existed because large houses contain rooms that must exist, furnished with adequate furniture arranged without conviction, used by no one for any particular purpose, passing its days in the particular purposelessness of spaces that no one has thought to claim. She had claimed it in the 2nd month. She had done nothing that announced itself as significant. She had moved a chair, one chair from the north wall to the window, and replaced a painting that had hung in that spot since before either of them arrived with a smaller one from the upper corridor, a landscape of the western coast that had apparently been stored facing the wall since the previous occupant of the house. She had brought in a low table from somewhere. She had arranged 3 books on it, not decoratively but in the specific way of books that are there to be read. She had done all of this quietly and without comment, and the room had become, by some alchemy of attention and instinct, a room that a person could actually inhabit. He had used it 4 times. He had not noticed the chair. He was standing in it now, on a Thursday morning in November, 2 weeks after his wife had departed for her family's estate for a visit that had been described as indefinite, and he could not have named, if asked directly, what was wrong with the room. It looked correct. It contained the correct furniture in what appeared to be the correct arrangement. The landscape was on the wall. The table was by the window, and yet the room had the quality. He would spend a long time trying to find the word for it and would eventually arrive at hollowed, of a space from which something necessary had been removed, something that had not been the furniture and had not been the painting, and had not been any individual element he could identify, but that had been. He was only now beginning to understand the fact of her attention. The attention that had made the room a room rather than a collection of objects in a defined space. He was standing in the centre of it, and the room was hollow, and he did not know why, and that not knowing was a new and thoroughly uncomfortable form of knowledge. This is the story of what a woman makes when she is given a cold house and no instruction, and the specific, underestimated intelligence of someone who has learned to tend things without being asked and without being thanked. And it is the story of a man who did not understand what he had until the rooms began to tell him. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell before we go any further, because what she built in that house is only half the story, and what he does when he finally understands it is the half that matters. Stay from the beginning. She had arrived at Ashverton House in late winter, when the grounds were bare and the light came through the tall windows at the angle that reveals every surface's deficiency. The house was not in disrepair. It was maintained by a competent staff with the particular efficiency of people who have been doing their work without direction for long enough that the work has become its own justification. The fires were lit, the rooms were clean, the accounts were managed with the scrupulous attention of a housekeeper who had never been given the opportunity to do anything except the minimum that was required, and had accordingly made the minimum excellent. What the house was not was inhabited. She understood the distinction the first morning when she came downstairs to find a breakfast arranged with mechanical precision, the correct dishes, the correct temperature, the correct placement, in a dining room that felt, despite all of this correctness, like a dining room in which no one had ever had an actual morning. She sat in it and ate her breakfast and looked at the walls, and she understood that she was in a house that functioned and did not live, and she understood that the not living was not an accident, but an inheritance, the accumulated result of years of occupancy without occupation, of a man who slept and worked and ate within these walls and had never once, as far as the walls could tell, been present in them. He was not cruel. She had known this before she arrived, in the careful, second-hand way that a woman knows the essential facts about a man she is to marry before the marriage has taken place, through the observations of people who had known him in contexts other than the one she was about to inhabit. He was competent. He was fair in his dealings. He was respected by his tenants and regarded with genuine esteem by the people who worked for him. He was, by all available evidence, a good man in the ways that the word good is measured publicly, which was precisely the category of goodness that had nothing to say about what he was like in the rooms that no one else entered. She would learn what he was like in those rooms herself. What she learned in the first months was that he was absent without being away. He came to breakfast and he went to his correspondence. He came to dinner and he went to his accounts. He was in the house in the way that furniture is in a house, occupying space and fulfilling a function and producing no particular sense that it had noticed the other furniture around it. He was not unkind. He was simply, in the particular and thoroughgoing way of certain men, not there. She had married him with clear eyes and without the specific vulnerability of someone whose happiness depended on his presence. She was practical, and she was capable, and she had a quality of self-sufficiency that was genuine rather than performed, that had been built not from disappointment, but from the early understanding that a person's interior life was their own responsibility and could not be outsourced. She did not require his company in order to use the hours of her days well. What she did require, and had always required, and had arrived at his house fully prepared to invest, was purpose. She found it in the house, not immediately, and not through a single decision, but in the gradual and unannounced way that a person of her particular temperament finds purpose, which was by noticing what needed doing and doing it, without ceremony and without the expectation that the doing would be remarked upon. The blue sitting room was the first room, the library was the second, and the transformation there was more significant, because the library was a room that had clearly once been alive and had been allowed, through years of functional use without actual care, to become merely adequate. The shelves were organized by size rather than subject, which offended her on a level she could not entirely articulate, but that had to do with the understanding that books organized by size are books organized for appearance, not for use, and a library organized for appearance is not a library at all. She reorganized it over 3 days, working in the mornings when the light was good and the house was quiet, and the result was not decorative but functional in the specific way of things that have been arranged by someone who actually reads and knows how reading works and what a person needs when they arrive at a shelf wanting something. He used the library every day. He had used it every day before she arrived. He noticed the reorganization on the 4th day, when a volume he typically retrieved from the east shelf was no longer on the east shelf. He did not ask her about it. He located the volume in its new position, which was with the other books on that subject, in a section that now had an internal logic it had previously lacked, and he returned to his reading. And he said nothing. She had not expected him to say anything. She had not done it for him, precisely. She had done it because the library had been arranged incorrectly, and she had corrected it, and the correction was its own justification. There were other rooms. There were always other rooms in a house of that size, and she moved through them with the patient, unhurried attention of someone who is not trying to transform a place but to tend it, to find in each space what it was asking for and supply it as economically and precisely as possible. She did not redecorate in the grand sense. She did not impose a vision. She simply paid attention in the particular way that produces, over time, a house that has the quality of a house in which someone is actually living, and the quality accumulated slowly and without announcement until Ashverton House became, by the end of the first year, a different kind of place than it had been when she arrived. The staff noticed before he did. Mrs. Holt noticed first, and what she noticed was not any specific change, but a quality of the whole. The way the house had acquired a kind of coherence it had previously lacked. The sense that the rooms were connected to each other by something more than corridors, that they had been thought about in relation to each other by someone who understood how people actually moved through spaces and what they needed when they arrived in them. She said nothing about this to the Duke. She had learned in 4 years of managing his household that he received information best when he had already arrived at the need for it. He arrived at the need for it gradually, in the particular way that a man who does not attend to his surroundings begins to attend to them when the surroundings change, and the first real evidence of his attention arrived on an evening in the 2nd year when he came to the library and found her reading in the chair she had moved to the window, and he sat down in the chair across from her, and he read too, and neither of them spoke, and the evening had the quality, which she noted with the careful attention she brought to everything, of 2 people in the same room for the first time. He came to the library more often after that, not always when she was there. Sometimes she arrived to find that someone had been using the chair by the window and had left it turned slightly toward the fire, which was not how she left it, which meant he had been there and had moved it, which meant he had been sitting in her chair and looking at the fire. And she found this, when she found it, something she held quietly and without interpretation, because it was a small thing, and she had learned not to build large things out of small ones prematurely. What she had not yet told herself, and what she was not yet prepared to tell herself, was that the house was not the only thing she had been tending. If you are still with this story, you already understand what she understood. That some things only become visible when they are already almost gone. Subscribe to this channel now and turn on the bell, because the part that comes next is the part where he begins to understand it too, and the understanding is not easy and is not comfortable and is precisely what this story is built to show. The departure, when it came, was not dramatic. She had given it a great deal of thought before she gave it a great deal of action, which was her way with most things, and what the thought produced was the understanding that she had been doing something in his house for 2 years, that she had begun without fully understanding its nature, and that the nature of it, now that she understood it, required her to make a decision. She had been making Ashverton House livable. She had been doing this with the same quiet competence she brought to everything, and she had done it well, and the house was genuinely livable now, in the way that houses are livable when someone with real attention and real care has spent real time on them. She had done this entirely without acknowledgement, not without witnesses. Mrs. Holt had witnessed it, and the staff had witnessed it, and occasionally Lord Fenwick, who came to dinner every few weeks and paid the kind of attention to his surroundings that most guests do not, had witnessed it and had said things to her, quietly and specifically, that told her he understood what he was looking at. But the man for whom the house had been made livable had not, to any degree, she could identify or measure, noticed. Not the blue sitting room, not the library, not the warmth that had come into the dining room when she changed the arrangement of the table and the candles and the particular formality of it that had been making everyone in it feel like they were attending a function rather than eating a meal. Not the way the East Corridor smelled different now, because she had found in the garden store a quantity of herbs that the previous gardener had been drying for purposes she could not determine, but that she had arranged in bunches in the corridor, and that had transformed its character without anyone apparently registering the transformation. He had moved through all of it, with the comfortable invisibility of a man who has never learned to look at his surroundings, because his surroundings have always been managed for him by someone else, and she had been the latest in a long succession of someone else's, and she had done it better than any of them, and he did not know. She was not angry. She wanted to be precise about that, at least to herself. Anger required a disappointed expectation, and she had not expected acknowledgement. She had not done it to be thanked. What she had done it for was more complicated and more honest than that, and the complication, when she finally named it, was this. She had been tending the house because she had hoped that the house, made livable enough, would eventually produce the kind of life that two people could actually inhabit together, and the hope had been patient and had been unrewarded, and had finally, with the particular quietness of hope that has exhausted its own patience, run out. She packed one trunk. Not the jewels, not the dresses the London season had required, not the accumulated evidence of 4 years of performing a version of herself that this house had asked for and her husband had not noticed. One trunk, the contents of which represented the things that were actually hers, that had been hers before the house and would be hers after it. And she arranged for the carriage to be brought around on a morning in November when the frost had come in and the grounds were bare again. And she departed with the composure of someone who has made a considered decision and intends to allow it to stand. She told Mrs. Holt. She told no one else. Mrs. Holt had listened with the expressionless expression of a woman who has been managing the intersection of private lives and public households for long enough to have developed a face that reveals nothing and contains everything. And she had said she understood, and she had said it in the tone that Mrs. Holt used for things she genuinely understood, which was different from the tone she used for things she was simply acknowledging. And that distinction, that small and private distinction in the voice of a woman she had come to genuinely respect, had been the nearest thing to a farewell she received. He found out from his secretary. That was the way of it. The secretary had been informed by the coachman, who had been informed by the footman who had loaded the trunk, and the information had travelled up the household hierarchy with the particular efficiency of news that no one wants to be the one to deliver, so that everyone delivers it quickly to the next person in line, and the next person is the one who has to take it to the Duke. He had been at his correspondence when the secretary came in. The secretary had told him, with the neutral precision of a man who has learned to deliver information without editorializing, that Her Grace had departed that morning for her family's estate, and that she had indicated the visit would be indefinite, and that she had left no further instructions except those she had provided to Mrs. Holt regarding the household. He had put down his pen. He had looked at the window. He had said, after a moment, that he understood. He had said it with the composed expression he brought to all information. And then the secretary had left, and the room had been quiet. And the quiet had been a different kind of quiet than the rooms of Ashfordton House had been quiet for the past year, and he had sat in it for a long time before he picked up his pen again. The rooms told him. That was how it came to him, not through a single reckoning or a decisive moment of self-knowledge, but through the rooms, which began in the days after her departure to disclose to him one by one and with the slow, irrefutable logic of things that have always been true and are now simply being heard, what they had been given and what they had lost. The blue sitting room first, on the Thursday morning when he stood in it without purpose and felt the hollowness of a space from which the organizing intelligence had been withdrawn. The library next, where he reached for a book and found it exactly where it should logically be and understood for the first time that it had not always been where it should logically be, and that the logic was not the library's logic, but hers, and that the library worked the way it worked because she had made it work that way, and that he had been using it daily without knowing who to thank for it, the East Corridor, where something was different and he could not for 3 days determine what it was, and then on the 4th day understood it was the absence of a scent he had been moving through without registering for a year. Dried herbs, something green and specific and entirely her decision, that had been in the air of that corridor every morning, and that was now gone, and the going of it was a loss he had not known to anticipate and could not now account for with any of the usual mechanisms. Mrs. Holt came to him on a Wednesday with the household accounts and waited while he reviewed them, and then said, in the tone that he had learned, meant she was going to say something he needed to hear and had decided not to wait any longer to say it, that she wished to mention that the winter garden had been prepared for the season by the Duchess before her departure, that she had spent the last week of her residence ensuring that the beds were properly put to bed for the frost, and that the Duchess had asked Mrs. Holt to convey to whoever attended to it in the spring that there were narcissi coming in along the south wall that would need clearing around by March. She had prepared the garden for a spring she did not know if she would return to see. He received this information with the still expression of a man for whom the information has arrived in a place that has no established procedure for receiving it. And he said, "Thank you," and Mrs. Holt withdrew, and he sat at his desk for a long time with the accounts in front of him and did not read them. He wrote to her on a Friday. The letter took 4 drafts, which was notable for a man who wrote correspondence the way other men breathed, fluently and without visible effort. The first 3 drafts had the quality of letters written by someone who is trying to manage a situation. The 4th had the quality of a letter written by someone who has decided, at some cost to his own composure, to simply tell the truth. He told her that he had spent 2 weeks in a house that had become, through her residence in it, a different kind of house than it had been before she arrived, and that he had not understood this while she was in it, and was understanding it now in the particular and thoroughly uncomfortable way of understanding that arrives through absence. He told her that he had stood in the blue sitting room on a Thursday morning and could not determine why it felt wrong, and that it had taken him 3 days to understand that what was wrong was not anything in the room but his own previous failure to understand what had made the room right. He told her that he had used the library every day for a year and had not once thought to mention that it had become, through some reorganization he had not witnessed, considerably more useful than it had been before. He told her about the East Corridor and the herbs and the 4 days it had taken him to identify what the absence was. He told her about the garden and the narcissi and March. He told her he understood that none of this constituted an apology, and that what constituted an apology was something he was trying to construct and was finding more difficult than any other thing he had written in recent memory, because the difficulty was not linguistic, but structural, that you could not apologize for the thing he had done without first admitting what the thing was, and that admitting what the thing was required him to say plainly that he had lived alongside a person of considerable intelligence and care who had been making his house livable for 2 years without his acknowledgement, and that the not acknowledging had not been deliberate, which was perhaps the most damning part, because deliberate indifference at least requires some awareness of the thing you are choosing to disregard, and he had not had even that. He said that what he had had was an assumption, that she would manage, that she was managing, that the managing was its own satisfaction and required nothing further from him, which was the particular blindness of a man who has never been required to look and has accordingly never developed the capacity. He said he was trying to develop it. He said he was trying in the way that a person tries when they have understood, belatedly and at real cost, that what they were previously doing was not trying but assuming, and that the difference was not small. He asked if she would come back. He did not ask it with conditions. He did not ask it with promises, because he understood that promises were the wrong instrument in a situation that required demonstration rather than declaration. He asked it with the plainness of a man who has run out of the comfortable architecture of indirection and is offering what he actually has, which is the question, and the willingness to hear the answer, and the beginning of the understanding of what the answer would require of him. She read the letter in the east room of her family's house on a grey morning, with the same careful attention she brought to everything that deserved precision. She read it twice. She set it down and looked at the window for a long time. She was not, in that moment, making a decision. She had learned to distinguish between the moment of decision and the moment of understanding what the decision required, and she was in the second moment, not the first, because the decision was already present and had been present since the morning she read about the narcissi and the south wall and the instruction she had left for March, and understood that she had left it because some part of her had already decided she was not finished with that garden, or with the house, or with the man who had finally, imperfectly, understood enough to put 4 drafts in the fire and write the true thing. She replied, "On Saturday." The letter was shorter than his. She told him that she would return in 2 weeks, and that she was telling him this not as an agreement to return to what they had been, because what they had been was not something either of them should wish to return to, but as the beginning of an attempt at something different, the terms of which would require a conversation she intended to have plainly and without the performance of composure she had spent 2 years perfecting. She told him that she had prepared the south wall for spring because she had hoped, and that hope was not something she offered without consideration, and that she was offering it now because she believed the letter she had received was the first genuinely honest thing she had been given in 2 years of marriage, and that honesty, even when it arrived late, was worth something. She told him that she expected him to be in the library when she arrived, and that she would bring tea, because she intended to be there for a long time, and that the library worked well for that kind of conversation, which he already knew, because she had made it work that way. She returned on a Tuesday. He was in the library when she arrived. He had been there, according to Mrs. Holt's carefully neutral account, since breakfast. He had not reviewed the accounts. He had not attended to the correspondence. He had been in the library, in the chair by the window that she had arranged for reading, and that he had been using as though it were his own, which she had decided some time ago was the closest he came to acknowledging that she had made something good. She brought the tea. She sat down in the chair across from him. He looked at her with the expression she had seen developing in the weeks before her departure, and that was now more legible than it had been, stripped of the usual composure, carrying something that she read as the accurate cost of a man who has understood something important and is still in the process of living inside the understanding. He said her name. She said she was there. They sat for a long time before either of them said anything else, and the library was warm, and the light was the particular grey of a November morning, and outside the window the grounds were bare, and the south wall was waiting for March. And the house was quiet around them, in the way of a house that is attending to something. He told her about the rooms, all of them, not with fluency, not with the precise and managed eloquence he brought to correspondence, but with the halting, imperfect honesty of a man saying things that have no practiced form because he has never said them before and is therefore building the sentences as he goes. He told her about the blue sitting room and the chair and the painting and the particular quality of the room that he had only understood when she was no longer in it. He told her about the library, the logic of it, the way he had been moving through her logic for a year without knowing it was hers. He told her about the corridor. He told her about the morning he understood the herbs. She listened with the patient, complete attention that had always been her most underused gift. In this house and in others, the attention that had understood people clearly and accurately and had rarely been thanked for the understanding. When he finished, she said that she was glad he had told her. She did not say it was enough. She did not say it fixed anything, because they both understood that it did not fix anything, that what had been 2 years of one person managing a shared life alone was not undone by a letter and a library conversation, however honest. What she said and what she meant in all the precision she had always brought to words she chose to mean was that it was a beginning, that she had come back for the beginning, and that the beginning was this, the two of them in the room she had made for this kind of conversation, on honest ground for the first time, both of them present, both of them willing, and the narcissi already under the south wall, waiting for March. The south wall kept its promise in spring. The narcissi came through in the last week of February, ahead of the frost's retreat, pale and deliberate along the cleared ground, and she was there to see them, standing at the garden's edge in a coat she had brought from her family's house, that was not the coat she had worn to manage his garden, but her own coat for her own mourning, in a house that was becoming in the slow and imperfect way of things that are genuinely built rather than quickly assembled, hers in a different sense than it had been before. He came to find her, not because he had been sent or reminded, not because the morning's schedule had directed him toward the garden, because he had looked up from the breakfast table and the east window had shown him a grey morning and a figure in a familiar coat at the far end of the south wall, and he had put down his cup and come out. He stood beside her at the wall and looked at the narcissi. He said they had come earlier than she had expected. She said the wall held the heat well when the frost was light. He said he had not known that. She said there were a number of things about the garden that he had not known, and that she intended, if he was interested, to tell him about them. He said he was interested. She looked at him in the pale February light. This man who was learning, slowly and without grace, to be present in the rooms and the mornings and the life he had been given and had not previously understood were gifts, and she found in his expression the thing she had been looking for since the library conversation, which was not perfection and was not transformation, but was something more honest and more durable than either. It was attention. Real attention directed at her, at the wall, at the narcissi that were her doing, at the garden that she had prepared for a spring she had chosen to return to. He was looking. He was there. She turned back to the wall. She began to tell him about the garden, and he listened, and the morning held them both in the particular way of mornings that are not remarkable, and are, because of that, exactly everything. If this story moved you, leave a like. It costs nothing, and it tells us that quiet things deserve to be found. Subscribe to this channel and share this with someone who has tended something carefully and been unseen for it, because some stories do not just entertain. They remind people that what they have given has always had a value, whether or not it was ever named,